Hello, and we are making cookies today. The first cookie we're going to make today is a classic chocolate chip cookie with a couple of little variations. But before we start, I'm going to talk about two essential ingredients for our cookies. For chocolate chip cookies, you can't get more essential than your chocolate. So I have here a Lindt 70% dark chocolate bar, which I love it. I prefer a slightly darker chocolate over a semi-sweet, which is 50% dark, for a few reasons. One, it's a little more rich in flavor, and I find it a really great counterbalance to the sugar. Sometimes I also get these President's Choice. They're actually made by us. They're also a 70% dark. And for your money, they're often, for a 300 gram bar, they're usually about $4 or $5. So it's a little bit more cost effective. I also sometimes use chocolate chips. This brand I have is Kirkland. It's not my favorite brand, that's a Costco brand. My favorite brand of chocolate chips are the big jumbo chips that you can get. As far as I know, pretty much if you're in Toronto, Strictly Bulk, they're the Calabo chips, or you can sometimes get them at Ed's Real Scoop. They're really thick, they've got a really lovely texture. They're almost gloopy, which may sound gross, but they're really, really great chocolate chips. You're gonna find like not all chocolate chips are the same. Sometimes they're inexpensive, but they're inexpensive because they've got a lot of wax and filler in them, and that's why. So, as in, if you're cooking with wine, taste the wine before you use it because you want to make sure you like the flavor. Same goes for the chocolate. Okay, moving on to butter. Butter is similarly not all the same. There's been lots of talk in the news in the last couple of years. People really caught on to the idea of buying European butter, and the reason that that's a more attractive butter to use for your baking, whether it's bread or you're making croissant, or in today's case we're making cookies, is that it's got a higher fat content. Okay, and so that's why people use them. So number one, when you're using butter, always use unsalted, and then you add your own salt in so you can control it. The other thing is sometimes with butter, I often buy no-name butter because it's cheap. But the reason is, sometimes the reason why it's inexpensive is that it's actually been filled out a little bit with water. So the method we're going to use today to make our cookies, for two reasons, is we're not going to use it from room temperature. We're actually going to melt it down. So we're going to skim off the milk fat and get just all the oil. But the other reason for doing that is that when you simmer your milk or you melt it down, you're simmering off the water, and then that way you get a more accurate read of actually how much butter you have. Okay, because you don't want your cookies to be sort of soggy, or not soggy, but they're weighed down by excess water. So the first thing we're going to do to start is, our recipe calls for 1 cup of butter. So we are going to measure out 1 cup, and then when we melt it down, we're actually going to see, do we have 250 mils? And if we don't, we'll add a little bit more. So I'm going to cut this in half and get that measuring, and get that melting rather. And while it's melting, we're going to talk about our ingredients. Okay, you can see here that our butter is just simmering away. And now let's talk about the ingredients we're going to use for our cookies. Okay, our recipe calls for 1.5 cups of flour, and I'm also going to add in 1/2 cup of almond meal. Obviously, if you have a nut allergy, just do 2 cups of flour. Okay, then it's a 3/4 cup of packed brown sugar, 1/2 cup of white sugar, 2 eggs, teaspoon of baking soda, 2 teaspoons of vanilla, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and then I'm adding to it 1 cup of rolled oats, just for a bit of body, and I'm also adding a cup of walnuts, and I'm actually going to toast the walnuts and add a little teeny bit of sugar and a little bit of salt to the walnuts, just to give it a little bit more flavor. And I can show you how to do that. And for the chocolate, I'm going to use about 3/4 of this bar, and I'm just going to bust it up into some nice big chunks and get that ready so we can just knock off those cookies really quickly. The recipe, once we get the cookies all mixed up, which we're going to do it in a standing mixer just because it's faster. You don't have to use a standing mixer, especially since our butter is melted. If you're using butter at room temperature, and And you might want to use a standing mixer just to beat it in and make it a bit more fluffy. But I find with these cookies, what you get is this really beautiful, ripply, crackly top. And that is because we're using our melted butter. So I'm just going to cut it this way. I'm just going to cut it all up just because I'll use it anyway for something else. So I'm just going to make them into some nice, easy chunks. You could certainly use milk chocolate if you want it with this recipe. Again, I prefer the dark chocolate. There's so much sugar in it that I just find milk chocolate, it's too sweet for me. But you might find if you're making them for kids, it's not too sweet for them. So that's pretty good. You don't want massive, massive chunks. It's just a bit much to go through. So we're gonna measure out 1.5 cups of these nice big chunks. Here is our beautiful browned butter. It's got this foam on top. And if you look underneath, you can see it's actually browned on the bottom. It's not burnt, but it's browned. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna skim the foam off and then we're gonna measure it out, okay? So here's our butter and it's we've browned it. You can see in the bottom of the pan, it's got some browning there. It got really foamy and then you allow it to sit for a few minutes and the foam just sort of dissipates. Let's pour it out and we're just gonna see how much we have. So that is not quite a cup. So I'm gonna melt a little bit more down and then I'm gonna show you how to toast your walnuts and then we're gonna make our cookies. Any kind of nut, okay? You're gonna toast it medium, like a medium temperature. Get the pan a bit warm. You're putting the nuts in the pan and your nuts, first you're gonna move them around because you don't want them to burn. But second, you're really gonna rely on your nose for this and your ears if they start to hear a bit of a crackling sound. But it should start to smell warm and toasty and it's gonna really bring off a really nice aroma, okay? So if you go too high, if you go at like, for example, on this cooktop, the highest range is 10. If I toast it at a 10, you're not toasting it, you're burning it. So imagine you're slow roasting a marshmallow. So you want that golden brown, okay? And a teeny bit of carbon is nice for flavor, but you don't want them burnt because burnt is pretty gross. Okay, so I've let that heat up for a little bit. Now I'm gonna toss my nuts in the pan and you can even just shake them and it's in a few minutes. They're gonna start to toast up. Once they get a little bit warm, I'm gonna sprinkle a teeny bit of sugar and salt on top just because I like that flavor, okay? You don't have to do that. And if you don't like walnuts, obviously you could do pecans, you could do almonds, and if you don't like nuts at all in your cookies, then you're gonna forego this all together, okay? So this is gonna be a few minutes. We'll come back and you'll see what they look like. So here's my walnuts. I'm gonna throw a little bit of sugar on and you're gonna find that it's gonna melt really quickly. I'm gonna add a little salt and I'm just gonna give them a quick toss. We do have a bit of carbon in there and they are nicely coated. I'm gonna pull them off, allow them to cool, excuse me, so we don't melt chocolate chips, and then let's make them now. Okay. All in a standing mixer. It's gonna go bing, bang, boom. Let's go. Butter, melted butter is in the mixer. Browned butter, I mean. Get that moving. Sugar. Sugar. Always remember to scrape down in between. Eggs. Eggs. Vanilla. Salt. baking soda. Take a little pause. Let's give it one final whip. I'm gonna turn it on low. Almond meal. And that is it for our standing mixer. Shake off the ingredients. And the rest of this is manpower. Okay, here's our flour. We're gonna give that a little stir. Make sure you get all the flour on the bottom. One, just because your recipe calls for it, and two, it's really yucky. In a baked good, if you get a ribbon of flour, similarly, if you get an area of uncooked stuff, it's really pretty gross. Okay, so that goes in there now, and then we're gonna add all our goodies. We've got our rolled oats. Our big chocolate chips. So we have a nut allergy in our home, so half of the dough is going to be as is. Whoopsies. And the other half is going to have our toasted walnuts. And that's it. Cover in plastic, 30 minutes in the fridge. Okay, it needs 30 minutes to rest. You could do it overnight too if you wanted to. And then we're gonna cook it at 350, 9 to 11 minutes. And that is your first round of cookies. Hey, who's in the mood for cookies? I am. We have no nuts and nuts, walnuts. Our cookie dough, we just let it cool overnight. I recommend minimum 30 minutes. Definitely use a silicone mat or a parchment lined baking sheet, okay? You're gonna preheat your oven to 350 and they're gonna cook anywhere between 9 and 11 minutes. The most important thing, I just used 2 spoons to scoop them out. The most important thing is that they're consistent in size. The grossest thing is to have a raw cookie in the middle. It's one thing to eat raw cookie dough, it's another thing to have a baked cookie on the outside and have a gooey patch in the middle. That's pretty gross. But you just want to keep them consistent. Some people have them like to scoop them with a nice ice cream scoop so they're completely uniform. That's your business, okay? Give 2 inches in between each cookie, and away we go. This out, and I'm gonna make them kind of big. Oh, would you look at that? I actually love cookies with nuts, and I guess I love my daughter with a nut allergy a little bit less. So we have 12 with nuts and 10 with no nuts. Not bad. So like I said, 9 to 11 minutes. Put them in the middle of your oven. If you think your oven has a hot spot at the halfway mark, give them a little bit of a rotation, okay? When they come out, I'll show you what they look like when they come out, but you're gonna wanna put them on a cooling rack. And then when they're warm enough to take them off, put them in a jar or just sit quietly in a corner and eat them.